The Wall, the ultimate concept album, is a total movie in your head. Are you aware that Comfortably Numb is the most played Pink Floyd song?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I didn't know that.
In the United States, since 1980, it has been played 330,000 times. How did you come to write that, and how did you come to write what is now this historical solo?
The piece of music that became that I wrote when I was doing my first solo album. And I wrote it at Super Bear Studio in the south of France, which is where we later recorded a lot of The Wall, but I did a solo album there, and Rick had done a solo album there before me. And I think its genesis was actually that my friends who were in the band Quiver, with Sutherland Brothers and Quiver, who had a hit with The Arms of Mary, they were working at Abbey Road with Bruce Welch as a producer, who was one of the Shadows. And he wanted to double track an acoustic on something of theirs, and he said he wanted to use a high-strung guitar on that. And my friend Willie, the drummer, was in that band, and he said, yeah, he told us to use this high-strung guitar and double-tracked a regular guitar with a high-strung guitar. And I said, well, what is a high-strung guitar? He said, well, it's one with higher strings, you know. And he wasn't very clear on it at all. I had no idea what it meant. So I got an Ovation acoustic guitar and strung it up with all unwound strings. Put 6 unwound strings on, and the top 2 strings were normal. The next 3 strings were an octave high, and the bottom string was 2 octaves high. And I started strumming chords with that guitar, and found that you could be very lazy. If you have an open acoustic guitar and you strum a D chord on it, you can't hit the bottom string because it's an E, a big, loud, open, low E. But if you do that on this high-strung version, it just sounds great. It's got a 9th note pinging away in it, and it felt like the more fingers I took off this thing, the better the chords started sounding. And I later found out that it was nothing like what people called a high-strung guitar. It's my own invention by following the advice of someone who didn't know what they were talking about. But that was the tune I wrote on it. And I was just reaching the end of mixing my first solo album and couldn't quite be bothered to work on that one and write words for it and finish it and add it in, luckily. And so it was going spare. And Paul Bezrin got me to play it to everyone, that and what became Run Like Hell.
What about the solo? Do you hear sort of a solo that you want to play and try to recreate it, or do you just sit down and play and the notes kind of drop out? Do you have a process?
I don't have one process. I have a number of processes, and one of them is to just pick up the guitar and play and see what comes out of the very first take, and often quite a bit of the substance of it will come out of the very first take, and see what you're doing. Sometimes I sing to myself over it and then try and play what I've been singing, and sometimes I just try and work it out all the way through.
What was your process for the solo in Another Brick in the Wall? That is such a specific sound.
The sound of it was this gold top Les Paul. Ezrin wanted me to play it direct inject, i.e. straight into the desk without amps at all. All that stuff. And after I'd recorded it, they liked it. Bob really liked it as it was, but I didn't think it had quite enough meat to it. So I persuaded them to let me run it out through a DI box backwards into an amp in the studio, off tape, and then so it would come out through a guitar amp, and we added the guitar amp sound a bit to the DI sound.
And also, that's the guitar that played that
Yeah.
solo, and that's an original. What is it? 1955.
55?
Yeah, 55. As the music grew, so did all of the Pink Floyd stage production. Yeah. And I wondered, when you're dealing with that extravagant of a production, does it make playing easier? Does it make playing more difficult?
You have to have teams of people who know exactly what they're doing, and you have to have a lighting director who's in charge of all those sort of things, so that you're not on the night. I mean, through all the rehearsals and everything, there are various, you take much more part in all that stuff, but when you get out onto the road, you've got to not have to worry about any of that stuff. You just got to get on with doing what you're there for. And that stuff all got a lot bigger after Dark Side of the Moon, when we started playing really big places and stadiums and so on. You didn't have the screens showing, the players playing in those days, and we were pretty boring to look at anyway, and we just thought that we should create massive spectacles that people could be watching while they were listening to us. So and that sort of grew and grew and grew.
But when you're playing a show that's happening around you, do you need to pay attention to it in a certain way, or do you just play the show and everybody else does the...
Hopefully it just gets on with it. The people who know what they're doing and get on with it. In The Wall, it was little more technical, and there was an awful lot of synchronization going on. So that meant that particularly for me, on the Wall shows that we did, it was really pretty complicated and tricky to keep with it, particularly for the first few shows. I had the whole show written out on a huge long piece of paper that was hanging back there somewhere, with all the notes for what had to happen next, all the way through.
More than any other band, when one listens to your music, you feel like you're not alone. You feel like somebody else is feeling what you're feeling, and you guys were never afraid to sort of put that out there. But when you put those kind of messages out there, was that ever scary to you?
No, I think people want to share, they want to feel that other people have felt the things that they have felt, and that other people can describe and comfort them by being part of a sharing experience, you might say.
Well, David, thank you for your time and for all the great music over the years. I get the feeling there's more to come.
I hope there is. I hope there is.
It's Saturday night, you must have